Je m'appelle Tom Chadillac. Je suis réalisateur. Ma spécialité, ce sont les comédies. C'est moi, là, le type qui ne sait pas danser. Sous ma direction, Jim Carrey a joué les ventriloques avec ses fesses, Eddie Murphy a revêtu un costume d'obèse, Steve Carell a adopté le look des ZZ Top, et Robin Williams s'est affublé d'un nez rouge. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est différent. Je vais vous raconter mon histoire, celle d'une maladie mentale. Mais commençons par le début. Pourquoi donc le réalisateur de Bruce Tout-Puissant et de S. Ventura se lance-t-il tout à coup dans le documentaire ? Croyez-moi, je me serais volontiers contenté de continuer à réaliser des comédies, mais il m'est arrivé quelque chose d'extraordinaire qui m'a obligé à revoir mes priorités et à me tourner vers l'inconnu. Suite à cet accident, j'ai souffert d'une mauvaise fracture du poignet et mon traumatisme crânien s'est transformé en syndrome post-commotionnel. Les symptômes de cette maladie évoluent pendant des mois, voire des années, et ne disparaissent parfois jamais.
When that head injury occurs, often there's an experience of depression that follows, and with that depression comes an experience of someone being suicidal.
A multiple on-field concussion suffered by former NFL safety Andre Waters led to his depression and his suicide in November.
Mes symptômes étaient violents. J'étais devenu extrêmement sensible à la lumière et au bruit. Je souffrais de sautes d'humeur et un tintement résonnait en permanence dans ma tête. La médecine traditionnelle ne pouvait rien pour moi. Je me suis donc tourné vers des thérapies alternatives comme la rétroaction biologique ou la médecine hyperbare. Mais il a bien fallu se rendre à l'évidence. Rien ne semblait faire effet. Après plusieurs mois de véritable torture, j'accueillais la mort à bras ouverts. Contrairement à beaucoup de patients atteints de ce syndrome, je n'étais pas suicidaire mais j'étais persuadé d'être condamné. La perspective imminente de ma mort m'a permis d'appréhender les choses autrement. Je me suis dit, puisque je vais mourir, quel message est-ce que je veux faire passer avant de partir ? Tout est devenu simple, logique. Je voulais expliquer aux gens ce que j'avais appris. J'avais appris que le monde dans lequel je vis n'est que mensonge, et que mon mode de vie, loin d'être bénéfique à qui que ce soit, menait le monde à sa perte. Après des mois d'isolement, complètement coupé du monde extérieur, les symptômes de mon syndrome post-commotionnel ont brusquement commencé à disparaître. Lorsque mon état s'est suffisamment amélioré pour me permettre de voyager, j'ai attrapé une caméra, constitué une équipe de tournage, et je suis parti à la recherche de ceux qui m'ont aidé à remettre ma vie en question. Je voulais aller plus loin et engager le débat autour de deux grandes questions que l'on se pose rarement.
Have you ever seen any of my movies? Just curious.
I don't know which one. Sorry.
Did you ever see Ace Ventura?
Ace Ventura.
Ace Ventura.
Did you ever hear that movie? It's a Jim Carrey movie. No. God bless you.
I don't know if you've ever even heard of it. Ace Ventura.
No.
You ever heard of Ace Ventura? What? Come on, brother. Say it again. Have you seen any films that I've done, just curiously?
Ace Ventura is one of my children and our family's favorite movies.
Oh, why do you do that? I should take a look at it. It's all right.
You might slip, you might slide, you might stumble and fall by the roadside. But don't you ever let nobody drag your spirit down.
We are asking some of today's significant minds, people like yourself, authors, journalists, religious leaders, historians, academics, etc., what's wrong with our world and what can we do about it? Most importantly, what we could do about it.
I was home sick, nursing a concussion, and I saw an inconvenient truth again. I see more news about the war in Iraq, and I see poverty, and I keep thinking that these are not the problems. There's a poison underneath. I think there's something behind the cracks, you know, and I think Rumi knew it. I think you know it. We're looking for the fundamental endemic problem. Is there a problem that causes all the other problems?
The biosphere is a zone of air, water, and land where all life exists. But there's another layer that humans have created that Wade Davis calls the ethnosphere. The ethnosphere is the sum total of all of the ways that human beings have imagined the world into existence.
Joan Didion had a wonderful quote. She said, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." And probably the biggest story we've ever told ourselves is the scientific story. And we always think of science as this ultimate truth, but science is just a story.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette.
Our current scientific story is more than 300 years old. It primarily describes a very reliable and well-behaved universe where separate objects operate according to fixed laws in time and space. The other part of our scientific story has been written by Charles Darwin, who described a process of competition for survival. And those things together have fashioned our world. We're told that we operate in a certain way. We realize that we're separate, and for me to do something to anyone else, I have to do something physical to that person. I have to punch them, drop them, freeze them, burn them, or give them a swift kick.
So for hundreds of years, the picture that has emerged from science is that we're basically made out of material stuff and we work in mechanistic ways.
If it can't be measured, manipulated, touched, tasted, it's not real.
Here's a metaphor that explains the whole thing. Assuming that I'm a decent mechanic and I know how cars work, I can take my car, which is running, turn it off, take it apart, spread the pieces all over the driveway, put it back together, turn the switch, and it'll turn back on. If I take my dog and cut him up into little pieces and spread them all over the driveway, and I'm a really competent surgeon and I know exactly how to reattach all those pieces, and I put them all back together, he's not going to bark at me. There's something fundamentally different between machines and life. And we are running our society as if we are pieces of a machine, and as if the world is a machine.
And what we create from that is a world, in a sense, based on the notion that we're all separate. And from that, we create education based on the notion that we're separate. And so we honor and enforce independence and competition. We create our business environment based on the idea of scarcity and competition. And our towns and cities are all based on this idea of separation. And so we fashion our world on the idea of needing to be significant at someone else's expense.
C'est exactement comme ça que j'ai été éduqué. Distingue-toi des autres, sois le meilleur, et sois le vainqueur.
That I work in, psychology, evolution, neuroscience, there's this basic assumption that we're wired up to compete and to gratify our own desires and to be these self-interest machines.
Western society in general, we feel we exist fundamentally as singular individuals and only secondarily as social beings. And that tends to create separations.
It isolates you. It tries to make you passive and apathetic as far as the political system is concerned, and active as a maximizer of consumption.
Your job and mine is not to be a citizen, is to be a consumer. This is the great mantra after 9/11, go out and shop.
I think one of the fundamental messages in the American marketing machine is that wealth and happiness are synonyms. If you want happiness, you have to have wealth, and you have to buy stuff, own lots of stuff.
There ain't no reason things are this way. It's how they always been and they intend to stay. I can't explain why we live this way. We do it every day. People walk around pushing back their desks, wearing paychecks like necklaces and bracelets, talking about nothing, not thinking about death. Every little heartbeat, every little breath. But love will come, set me free.
Je n'ai pas toujours eu le luxe de m'acheter tout ce que je voulais. Au début de ma carrière, j'ai galéré comme beaucoup d'artistes. J'ai enfin eu ma chance en tant que réalisateur quand j'ai décidé de parier sur celui qui, à l'époque, jouait le type blanc dans l'émission In Living Color. Du jour au lendemain, tout a basculé, et à partir de là, je me suis fait plaisir. J'ai commencé par m'acheter une villa de 650 mètres carrés à Beverly Hills. Piscine, vie de star.
Your choice for favorite comedy motion picture is Nutty Professor, Liar Liar. Bruce Almighty.
Au fur et à mesure que mon succès grandissait, mes envies évoluaient. Une plus grande maison et tout ce qui va avec. Je voyageais en jet privé, je partais en vacances, j'allais visiter des villas. Mais lorsque j'ai emménagé dans ma première résidence de Beverly Hills, un phénomène étrange s'est produit et a tout de suite refroidi mon enthousiasme. Les déménageurs venaient de partir et je me retrouvais là, seul dans l'entrée de ma maison. C'est alors que j'ai eu une révélation très étonnante. Je n'étais pas plus heureux. Selon ma culture et mon éducation, cette maison était synonyme de réussite. Et pourtant, cela ne faisait pas de moi un homme plus heureux. Intéressant.
These foundational notions of our relationship to stuff are grounded on a truth and a lie in our culture. The truth is that if you're naked and cold at night, outdoors, all alone, in the forest, and it's raining, you are unhappy. We can all agree on that. And if somebody, opens the door and says, come on in, here's a fire you can sit next to, here's clothing you can put on, here's a blanket, here's a warm place to sleep, here's a bowl of soup, suddenly you go from being unhappy to happy with very little stuff, but it's stuff that makes the difference, just like that. So that's the truth. The lie then is, well, if this amount of stuff will make you that happy, then 10 times as much stuff will make you 10 times happier, 100 times as much stuff will make you 100 times happier, 1,000 times as much stuff will make you 1,000 times happier, and Bill Gates lives in a state of perpetual bliss.
So it's a psychological problem, because you're right, because it's not the reality. The reality is that, if you have 2 billion instead of 1 billion, you're not twice as happy. But people are driven to accumulate, without asking the question of, will this make me happy or not?
So I found that a lot of people were unhappy, even though they seemed to have everything, even though they seemed to be doing or living that American dream.
Wealth actually does not, in and of itself, give you the contentment you thought you would have.
Remy says, be suspicious of what you want. That's so subversive in a consumerist culture, isn't it? We're meant to multiply our wants and indulge them. But he says, you dig pits to trap others and you fall in. Plot to get what you want and you end up in prison. I ride after a deer and find myself chased by a hog.
Jack Davis, professor of Native American Studies at the University of California, Davis, and he said in our language we have this word wetiko, which means cannibal, one who eats not literally the flesh of another, but who eats the life of another. And he said, we very quickly realized when you people came from Europe that you were infected with wetiko, that it's a mental illness.
One of the real problematic signs is the degree of loneliness in American culture. But what we lost is a sense of our communal tendencies, and we privileged the ideas of self-interest, the idea of materialism as a pathway to happiness.
It's a mystery to me. We have agreed, with which we have agreed. You think you have to want more than you need, and until you have it all, you won't be free. Society, you're a crazy breed. I hope you're not lonely without me.
Plato said that all wars stem from the comforts of the body. And what he meant was we're always trying to avoid unpleasantness. We always want to pad ourselves and cosset ourselves. So we need more stuff. And to get more stuff and protect that stuff, we have to make war, whether it's an actual war or an ineffective war of the rich against the poor.
Society, have mercy on me. Hope you're not angry if I disagree. Society, crazy indeed. Hope you're not lonely without me.
A couple hundred years ago, people believed in dragons and monsters. But now we've got another monster, and it's called the economy. And, if you read the Wall Street Journal, they treat the market and the economy as if they are a thing. Wait a minute now, the market is not some natural force of nature. We created the damn thing. And I believe the heart of our problem now is the separation of humanity from the natural world and the sense that the economy is the most important thing in our lives. We never ask the important questions like, what is an economy for? How much is enough?
20 years ago, on the Berkeley campus, Ivan Boesky declared greed is good. And that ideology has spread like wildfire.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
But the problem is that it's no longer just a couple 100 million people in the United States. Our way of doing business and our way of thinking has affected the world.
And this key idea that we embrace that is so dangerous is the idea that humans belong to a species that is separate from the rest of the living community. The only prediction I've ever made is that if there are still people here in 200 years, they will not be living the way we live. They will not be thinking the way we think.
Every culture ultimately comes up against the limits of growth and either dies off or reinvents itself in a way that's sustainable.
I think that we will have to have shock after shock after shock before we finally wake up as a species to the fact that we got it all wrong.
World-shaking changes
They're either going to come or we're going to become extinct.
L'homme n'est-il donc que cela? Une créature cupide, agressive et violente qui saccage la planète et ses habitants? Qu'en est-il alors de l'amour, de la compassion, de l'empathie? Il me semble que c'est une question essentielle qu'il faut se poser. Quelle est la vraie nature de l'espèce humaine?
The question that's before us is the essential nature of humans to cooperate or to dominate? Right? Is the essential nature of humans to have kingdom or to have democracy? If you talk to people in Aboriginal and Indigenous cultures, you find that the highest societal value is cooperation. And competition is a very low value. And competition beyond certain boundaries is considered mental illness. And you look at our culture, and cooperation is considered a relatively low value, and competition is considered the highest value, and we celebrate the most powerful competitors.
Part of the scientific story has been to say human nature is competitive.
Nature can be read in tooth and claw, which is the classical way of thinking of Darwinian nature. But the reality is that cooperation is as much a part of that as survival of the fittest.
Now, the story that we've all been telling ourselves since Darwin was that you got an alpha animal that's in charge, and everybody else bows down, and that justifies kingdom and hierarchy, and that's why we should treat our president like a king, and because that's just the natural order of things, isn't it? There were a couple of scientists that decided to test this hypothesis. There was this herd of red deer. They said, well, let's watch the deer. So they put these video cameras in the trees, and they're watching the herd. And at some point in time, they've got to go to one of the watering holes. Now, this is not a small decision. If they go too soon, then some of the members won't get enough nutrients. If they go too late, then some of the members may be dehydrated. If they go at the wrong speed, some of the members may not keep up and be vulnerable to predators. And it's a cultural problem for the deer. When do they go to the watering hole? Which of the watering holes do they choose? And who makes the decision? And what they expected was that the wise elder alpha deer, who every spring butted heads with all the other deer, that he would say, okay, guys, time to go. You know, I've decided. But that's not what they saw happen. Instead, what they saw happen was that as the deer were grazing, that some of them would start pointing at one of the three holes. And when the 51st percentage, say there was 100 deer, when the 51st deer pointed its head at one of the watering holes, so that a majority of them were pointing at one of the watering holes, within just a matter of moments, the entire herd would form together and go to that water hole. And very often the alpha deer would be in the back going, where'd everybody go? And so they thought, well, this is really strange. I mean, you know, and over and over, day after day, the exact same thing. It was democracy. They were voting. What they found was that democracy was being played out literally every day by these animals. You know, I remember the first time I went scuba diving, and I'm seeing a school of fish going along, and all of a sudden they go like this. I sit out in the backyard and watch a flock of starlings go by, and they're going like this, and then all of a sudden they're going like this, and then they're going like this. And how did they know? Well, it turns out when you do the slow motion photography, they're all voting literally with every wing beat or with every gill beat. They're voting hundreds of times a minute. And he said, you know, we found this from insects all the way up to primates. The basis of nature is cooperation and democracy. It's in our DNA.
When Darwin wrote The Descent of Man, he mentioned survival of the fittest twice, and he mentioned the word love 95 times. He talked a lot about behaviors like conciliation, cooperation. He found in mammals all of the lineaments, as he put it, for the golden rule, for the great religious ideals. The world is both cooperative and competitive. Darwin was interpreted and popularized by Huxley. Huxley had a much gloomier view of human nature and really stressed the idea that the natural world was an anarchy of the strong treading the weak. So that's kind of created this distorted thread that has been followed up to the present, the selfish gene, the idea that you get down to the smallest unit of being and behavior, and you find selfishness and self-interest.
Can I have cake?
No, it's mine. It's not yours. It's not your
People don't know this, but in 1871, Darwin wrote his first book about human nature, and he said, when you think about how we've evolved as a species, we're not fast, we're not strong, we don't have big fangs, we don't have the muscle mass that our primate relatives have. What we have is the ability to cooperate and to take care of others. And he said, sympathy is the strongest instinct in human nature. And sadly, historically, the people who popularized Darwin ignored that part to Darwin. There are really sound reasons, deep survival, reproduction-related reasons for why we have evolved to be good to others.
A solitary human being is actually an impossibility. You come into being because a community of two persons happened. I wouldn't be able to know how to speak as a human being. I wouldn't know how to be human. I wouldn't know how to walk as a human being. I have to learn it from other human beings. And so I depend utterly, completely on other human beings in order for me to be human. And so the truth, yes, the truth of who we are is that we are because we belong.
We're not just greedy creatures. If we also didn't have some sense of community, then the human race would never have persisted. So that's wired in as well. Now science is seeing things like mirror neurons as a underlying neuroscience reason for why we would be empathetic with other people.
The great apes, along with dolphins and possibly elephants, have something called a mirror neuron. And what was discovered was if a monkey observes a behavior that it itself has performed in the past, the same neuron lights up as if it itself is doing the action. In other words, there's something in the brain that doesn't distinguish between self and other. Very kind of mystical premise in some ways, but also underlies empathic behaviors. When you see somebody suffering, you feel it. That's the mirror neuron. So that we're really geared at a very primordial level to feel what another person feels.
I like movies and quiet dinners. Oh my goodness.
Big parts of our nervous systems, our brains, little chemicals in our bloodstream, all shaped by genes, are there to help us connect, to care, and to cooperate. There's this amazing bundle of nerves called the vagus nerve. If we show people images in the lab that are classic sources of wanting to connect.
What you're about to see now was a surprise for a little boy whose dad has been in Iraq. U.S. Navy Ensign Bill Hawes decided to surprise his 6-year-old son, John, at school.
The vagus nerve fires. It's when your chest kind of expands and you tear up and you get this big rush.
There's this sensation in the throat, a tear comes to your eye, and there's a sort of an elation in your chest. There's one neurobiologist named Jonathan Haidt asked people, when they witness people helping in a disaster, for example, everybody describes this response, which he came to call elevation. And he said that it shows that we're hardwired for a compassionate response to the trouble of others. That when people see this and have this powerful response that creates endorphins, creates the chemicals that we know are evolutionary reinforcers, that evolution likes us to feel this. It gives us a sense of elation.
It's in our DNA. You know, Tom, it's in our DNA. It's like we are born to be egalitarian and democratic. We're born to respect each other. We are born to be community. We're born to be our brother's keeper. It's the way that we're wired.
All you have to do is hear a tale of an act of goodness, and you get this emotion. What an amazing piece of human nature, to have that emotion that makes us connect to the community.
Now and again, when we have served others, we actually discover a deep contentment. You can even say almost an ecstasy that is absent from the opposite.
Ce sentiment de profond bien-être, d'extase totale, je l'avais déjà ressenti à de nombreuses reprises en grandissant grâce à ma famille et au travail d'une personne en particulier.
Hey, Dad. It's me. Can we come? Is it too late?
Mon père a consacré une grande partie de sa vie à l'hôpital pour enfants de Saint-Jude. Là-bas, les enfants atteints de cancer peuvent se faire soigner gratuitement. Il a cofondé l'établissement avec Danny Thomas et en a été le directeur pendant 13 ans. La notion de générosité, c'est lui qui me l'a transmise.
There are not a lot of things lately that I've found inspiring. And this work inspires me. The whole culture that you created at St. Jude inspires me. This is the model of love your neighbor as yourself. This is the model of even love your enemy. Because you don't ask somebody what their political values are when they come to St. Jude. You say, are you sick? I will love you. That seems to me to be a model that should spread. How come it doesn't spread? And whenever I talk about it spreading to anybody, they think I'm crazy.
There's no question it should be emulated. But it's easier said than done. You know, you got a church out here. I go there and I cry because there's so much love in that church for an hour and a half. Then they go out to their cars, go to their lives, and don't get turned on again until like Saturday night or Sunday. And it's tragic, you know. In that church, blacks, Hispanics, whites sit side to side. During the Mass, they embrace each other, the kiss of peace and everything else. You think they'd do that on the street? You think they'd ever embrace in a hotel or a grocery store or anything of that nature? The answer is no, of course not.
And this is where you may tell me that I'm not a realist. But if those principals got to walk outside those churches and got to get in those cars with people and go to that business meeting on Monday, and the people in the business meeting would say, hey, hang on a second, I know we need profit to survive, but we have a different kind of profitability. We have to think about our neighbors. We have to think about our community, how we're adding a value. And let's talk about that.
I think it's a wonderful utopian dream, but I don't ever see the reality of it. I just don't see the reality of it. Knowing man.
J'ai entendu ce discours toute ma vie. Mon père le répétait, la société aussi. On dit que c'est utopique de croire en un monde où l'amour et la compassion régiraient chaque aspect de notre vie, jusqu'à notre vie professionnelle. On considère qu'il est normal de se comporter différemment d'un jour à l'autre, simplement parce que la nature humaine est ainsi faite. Est-il possible que nous ayons mal compris la nature humaine? L'Institut Heurtmat, qui étudie le cœur humain, en est arrivé à cette conclusion, et est même allé plus loin.
The medical paradigm of our last 30 years has been the body's there to carry the brain around, and the brain's in control of everything. Really not that way. 90 to 95% of the nerves are carrying information from the body to the brain, not the brain to the body. So in reality, the heart sends far more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart.
In a sense, the heart is the boss of us. And they discovered if you take readings of the interstitial beats of the heart, in other words, there's the heartbeat and then there's this seemingly blank space in between, a pause. It turns out that pause has a lot of information that can be monitored. And that pause, for example, can tell us what emotional state a person is in.
You could think of the heart as a carrier wave. Well, as it turns out, the emotions are modulating the heart signal.
And they found that positive states, particularly compassionate states, are healthy for you. These states actually renew our physiology.
Love, care, gratitude, compassion, all of the things that we tend to associate and label positive, we do that for a reason, and that's the way it affects our body. Our heart is beating out a very different message. It's the optimal state. If the heart is sending a stressful or a negative emotional message or pattern, that literally inhibits our brain. We can't think clearly. You get mad at someone, you say something that ticks you off, and then you say or do something that a minute later you go, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. Where was my brain? It was inhibited. This is why anger makes us stupid. Whereas positive emotions lead to increased inner harmony, clear thinking, better performance. It's the mode we are literally designed to operate from.
We function better in a state of empathy and compassion and love than we do in a state of separation. In every traditional culture, the heart is considered to be the center of the self, not the brain. The heart contains an intelligence. The heart isn't just all gooey emotion. The heart is smart.
The heart, when it beats, it generates a large electromagnetic field.
So that field generated by the heart radiates external to the body. And so now I'm not describing an aura now. This is a literal, measurable magnetic field. If you now wire up two people, okay, we could literally measure my heartbeat being detected by your brain, and vice versa. And not only can we measure it, it can have a physiological effect.
We are a little bit like a television station and a television set all at the same time. We're sending and receiving information with every moment.
And HeartMath now believes that the human heart, your heart, my heart, may be able to predict the future.
In a protocol designed to measure our ability to predict a future event, in this case, we would be shown a photograph of either a negative or a neutral event. And what they found is that the body would respond prior to seeing the picture in a way that was far greater than chance. In other words, somehow the body seemed to know what the future picture was going to be.
So when I do experiments involving what I call presentiment, which is pre-feeling, we oftentimes will get an amazingly good result, which shows that people are aware of what's about to happen between 3 and 5 seconds in their future, even though the event that's going to happen hasn't even been selected yet.
What we found is that the heart is the first system to know this intuitive information. What that study did is I think it's confirmed what a lot of the great religions and the philosophers for millennia have been saying, that the heart really is the primary access point to what one could call your spirit or higher self.
All of Rumi's poems were meant to open the heart. And what does that mean? He says, what was said to the rose that made it open was said to me here in my chest.
The science has now discovered several really important elements that undermine everything we've been told about how we work and how the world works. We are all part of a universal energy field. We're not separate. As Einstein said, the field is the only reality.
The Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen experiment that was done to demonstrate a hypothesis that bothered Einstein no end, what he characterized as spooky action at a distance. And it basically had to do with two electrons that had been in connection with each other and then went off at infinite distances. And if the spin of one electron changed, the spin of the distant electron would change at the same moment. Now, there's no known mechanism for that, because if something has to travel distances, there should also be a factor of time. It should not happen simultaneously. It's known otherwise as quantum entanglement.
The direction that is pointing, it's not my finger, but where it's pointing is a world that involves very deep connections at a very deep level.
As we're moving from a strictly Newtonian model, cause and effect, billiard ball kind of model, to one that is much more engaged and entangled.
A physicist named Henry Stapp said that this is the most profound discovery in all of physics because it actually reinforces the mystical idea that we're not separate, that nothing is separate, that everything is connected everywhere at all times.
So we're dealing with a fabric of reality in which you can imagine that the threads are not like ordinary pieces of string. There's some kind of non-local stuff that spreads out everywhere in space and time, which means that everything that we know is resting upon a structure in which everything is actually connected all the time. So there is no separation. Fundamentally. We only have the appearance of separation when we look at things with our eyes.
There's sort of a field of mind which seems to respond to thoughts and emotions. That sounds mystical and improbable, but I'm fascinated by these lab experiments that have been done time and again in labs around the world.
I'm going to put these two electrodes in the yogurt. Let's get across it like so. Cover it up. Now we'll turn the meter on.
Selon les scientifiques de HeartMath, les émotions de l'homme affecteraient les organismes vivants. Rollin a simplifié la méthode pour qu'on puisse filmer cette expérience. Il pense que mes émotions peuvent avoir un impact sur les bactéries du yaourt qui se trouvent devant moi.
The trick is to really do something to get that unexpected, spontaneous kind of...
Okay. Maybe I should call my agent.
Maybe that would do it. That would do it. Yeah. Look, we actually are getting a bit of a response there.
As soon as I said my agent.
Yeah.
The source of stress and joy.
Right, so...
Yeah, look at that. That's because I'm literally thinking about that hand, that severed hand, and...
Oh, just hit it all the way to the end.
Oh my God, that's really loud.
Are you married?
Nice question. No, I'm not married anymore, Roland. I could call my lawyer. I haven't talked to him in a very, very long time. Oh, God.
That's all you need.
We have a lot of stuff between us, literally.
Yeah, well, you just got the response. You don't need to call him. You don't need to call him.
Now, obviously, I'm not connected to the yogurt.
Obviously not, yes.
So, but I'm connected to the yogurt. How?
That's something we don't know how, but based on these and many other types of experiments, this is that human emotionality does create a very real energetic field that radiates out from us, and that
other living systems are attuned to those energetic fields.
Ladies and gentlemen, my co-star, the yoga. He's now asking about per diem.
And these sorts of experiments of thought and emotion affecting distant living systems have been performed time and again. The same results always, that we affect each other's hearts, we affect each other's minds.
It's freaky to think of the idea that our everyday experience for most people most of the time says, I'm in here, me in here. But that is actually not what's happening.
Over about 50 years of research now, it's been discovered that if you take an electronic device that is designed to make random numbers.
These are electronic random number generators whose sole purpose in life is to do the equivalent of tossing coins really fast.
In the presence of strong emotionality, positive or negative, but it's the emotion that's the key. Thoughts don't do this, but the emotions do. It will cause those devices to stop being random. Something has created an order that's not supposed to be there.
We have 65 random number generators in cities around the world.
Now, the biggest effect that's been measured so far on this network is 9/11, when the trade centers were attacked. So what we saw was a huge correlated shift out of randomness in the worldwide network simultaneously.
Over the years, we've done something like 250 events, things like the big tsunami and so on. And we find that overall, the odds against chance are beyond 1,000,000 to 1 now, that during those events, the random number generators are no longer behaving randomly. So it suggests that what we've previously only seen in the laboratory on a very small scale seems to scale up to the globe at large. That when mass mind becomes highly focused, that something about the physical environment changes as well. And it's not just the random number generators that we hypothesize are changing. We presume everything is changing.
In other words, what we do at the individual level really does affect the global environment.
Well, this is the primordial mind-matter interaction. It's a saying that something about your mind, conscious awareness, is able to turn the potential fabric of reality into the world that we live in. And unfortunately, this sounds way too close to New Age concepts of you create your own reality. That a lot of scientists will hear what I'm saying and they'll dismiss it instantly. But actually, the essence of this idea is not even that controversial within quantum physics. The idea that consciousness is somehow linked into the behavior of the quantum world.
We now have all kinds of research that shows that this is a participatory universe in which everything we do in it is changing it. We have the idea that butterfly flapping in Brazil will affect the whole world. All of these ideas of interconnectivity and of our interior role in co-creating with all other species the entire universe.
Reality isn't an it. It is a relationship between the parts. It only takes form when relationship happens.
The one common conclusion from all of this is that we are more interconnected with each other at a fundamental level than people realized or previously thought.
I believe that not only are we all connected in some way, at some very, very deep level, but that we are connected with all life at some very deep level. I remember I was 7 or 8 years old, and I'm sitting with this old farmer with a glass of lemonade, and he leans over and he says, "Look at how blue the sky is." I'm like, "Yeah." And he says, "Look at how green the grass is and how it's moving. Look at the trees moving in the wind. See those birds flying over there?" "Yeah." He says, "You see the dust, blowing from the cars going down the road there?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then he leans over like he's gonna give me this big secret, He says, "It's all alive." It suddenly hit me. It's all alive.
Air is this thin layer around the planet that holds us together, that unites us, that links us to the past and to the future as far as we can see. What happens to one breath of air? Well, how do you follow a breath of air? 1% of the air is an element called argon. These elements are so snooty aristocrats, they don't react with anything else. They're inert.
You breathe in a breath of air. You can actually calculate how many molecules of argon are in that breath of air. And that breath of air goes out of your lungs, and it wafts around the room and outdoors eventually, and over time, will spread all the way around the world. And you can actually calculate how many argon atoms you just breathed in that were breathed by Alexander the Great, Mohammed.
Every breath you take has millions of argon atoms that were once in the bodies of Joan of Arc and Jesus Christ. That every breath you take has millions of argon atoms that were in the bodies of dinosaurs 65 million years ago. That every breath you take will suffuse life into the future as far as we can see.
We're connected by argon across the centuries, across space and time.
Aboriginals are absolutely right. All of life is our biological kin. To me, the most amazing thing about the Human Genome Project was that it turns out over 99% of the genes in a human being are identical to the genes in our nearest relatives, the great apes. That the vast majority of genes in our cells are identical to the genes in our pet dogs and cats. That we have thousands of genes identical to the genes in fish and insects and birds and fungi and trees. They are our relatives. We should be grateful and celebrate our dependence on our relatives, the rest of life on Earth, and celebrate the air, the water, the soil, the sunlight that makes our lives possible.
Rumi says just being in a body and sentient is a state of rapture. You know, just being here is a cause for celebration. It's a cause for grief, too. But grief is also a form of joy. The rose celebrates by falling apart, foil by foil falling to the ground. And the cloud celebrates by weeping.
So what we're now discovering is a science that underpins and explains all of those intuitive ideas that native cultures, traditional cultures, and Eastern religions has understood for pretty much all time. Now science is finally catching up with religion and spirituality and saying, yes, that was right. That was right all along. We were wrong.
It questions the story that science has developed about who and what we are. And that story is very important in driving how we behave. So if it turns out that we're just robots made out of meat, and there's nothing else, there's no intrinsic meaning or virtue or values or anything, it's just we're here and it's a mechanical system and that's all there is. If you strongly believe that, you would behave in a different way than if you also believe there's something beyond that, not religious, not necessarily even spiritual, but just some form of connection between what you strongly believe inside and the way you experience it is somehow reflected in the world at large and affects other people as well. So if I strongly believe that, if there are people in the world who are starving and angry, whether I know it or not, that's affecting me. And so I'd be much more inclined to help everyone all the time.
We do feel like lonely people in a lonely planet, in a lonely universe, but we are far grander than we've been told. The science shows us that we are all connected, that we never were alone. We're always part of a greater whole.
Every spiritual teacher has said it. We have to embrace the whole, see all of nature as family, see all of humanity as family. This is the emerging story. It's an old story. It's been told to us before, but I think we're just at the point where the confluence of technology and communication and this very ancient narrative are beginning to come together.
Notre perception du monde, de la réalité, de l'autre, est-elle erronée? Est-il possible que tout soit en fait lié et non divisé? Et si tel est le cas, comment changer les choses? Peut-on seulement les changer?
How do we change things? How does anything change? I mean, there too, you do have to look at history and ask yourself, where have things changed and how have they changed? What you see is a building up over time of a consciousness to the point where that consciousness has grasped a large number of people and where they act upon that consciousness.
If you look at our past, there's example after example of how attitudes have shifted and changed.
Once we start embracing the idea that we are all one and really take that one on board, then we'll start fixing things. So it starts with consciousness. It absolutely starts with consciousness and our definition of ourselves.
Think about this frame switch, right? It's not, what do I get out of this? It's, how do I bring out the good in you?
You have to change your mind. You have to change your perceptions. You change your perceptions, the world changes.
What people need to know in order to recognize their own power is everyday acts and small acts can build up over time into a great movement. I lived in the South, and I saw the South change. Now, how did it change? There was no one heroic act that did it.
No, sir, you cannot be admitted. Why? I am not going to serve you because of my race. I am not going to serve you because of my race. Move on.
But there were acts that multiplied from tiny acts, almost unnoticeable acts, that were then seized upon by others and emulated by others, and which built and built and built until the South was convulsed by change.
Law will be fair. The Constitution will be colorblind, as Justice Harlan said at the turn of the century.
Why a man whose father less than 60 years ago might not have been served at a local restaurant
can now stand before you to take a most sacred oath.
How does change happen? It happens because you are concerned. You are concerned. You are concerned. And you have a coalition. And we have a coalition that becomes this movement, and it overcomes apartheid.
I want you to lift your hands. I want you to say, our march to freedom is unstoppable. Our march to freedom for all of us.
There's Mr. Mandela, Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa.
Amandla! Amandla! In Africa!
The question is, what is it that causes cultures to figure out how to live in balance and move into a life that is good? If you read Peter Farb's book, Man's Rise of Civilization, he goes through all these different cultures at first contact. And they very often figured out in very different ways. But typically, the things that were in common among them were that the idea of the accumulation of private property beyond your needs was considered a mental illness.
How do we feed people, give them a safe place to sleep, run economies for the sake of the well-being of people, instead of what we've done to economies, which is turn them into a competitive money sport?
Dans Ishmael, Daniel Quinn se saisit d'un sujet, tout comme moi. Il veut changer le monde, mais il ignore tout de ce système auquel il participe et qui mène le monde à sa perte. Je vais vous raconter une histoire vraie qui décrit ce que nous sommes devenus. Il était une fois une tribu d'indigènes qui vivaient en paix depuis des milliers d'années. Chaque jour, le rituel était le même. Les hommes partaient à la chasse, et à leur retour, toute la tribu partageait équitablement le gibier ramené par les chasseurs. Personne n'était alors privé de nourriture, pas même les individus malades ou âgés. Un beau jour, l'un des hommes se dit « Je suis le meilleur chasseur. Je ramène beaucoup de gibier. Pourquoi devrais-je le partager avec les autres ?» Et à partir de ce jour, il commença à entreposer sa viande dans une grotte. Puis d'autres chasseurs se mirent à penser « Nous aussi, nous ramenons beaucoup de gibier. Pourquoi ne pas le garder pour nous ?» Et de la même façon, ils stockèrent leur viande dans des grottes. Il se produisit alors un phénomène qui n'avait jamais eu lieu jusque-là. Certains membres de la tribu, notamment les individus malades et âgés, étaient affamés, tandis que d'autres mangeaient à leur faim. Au fil du temps, la situation devint tellement courante qu'il n'était plus étonnant de voir des individus mourir de faim quand d'autres mangeaient plus que nécessaire. Le plus étrange, c'est que les aînés encourageaient leur descendance à reproduire ce comportement élitiste. Cette histoire n'est pas tirée du passé, c'est ce qui se produit en ce moment même. Cette tribu, c'est nous. Cette tribu, c'est moi. La nature est très claire sur ce point. Il existe une loi fondamentale à laquelle la nature se plie, mais que l'homme enfreint chaque jour. Cette loi prévaut depuis des milliards d'années et elle établit la chose suivante. Aucune entité de la nature ne prend plus que nécessaire. Et lorsque c'est le cas, elle devient contre nature et finit par disparaître. L'océan, la forêt, le corps humain, tous sont en symbiose. Le séquoia ne puise pas toutes les réserves nutritives du sol, juste le strict nécessaire. Le lion ne tue qu'une seule gazelle pour se nourrir. Il existe un terme qui désigne les effets de l'excès sur notre organisme. Nous appelons ça le cancer. Cette révélation m'a bouleversé. J'ai été vraiment choqué de réaliser que je contribue à développer ce cancer alors que j'aurais voulu participer à sa guérison.
It's a real challenge for a culture that's confronting a Wetiko-infected culture because you can either allow them to destroy you, you can run, which many groups did, or you can become them. The fourth option that many people of ancient tribal cultures hope for is that you can heal the people of their mental illness.
Some notion that I think a lot of people have, maybe most people have, that war has something to do with human nature. That war comes out of some fundamental human instinct for violence, aggression, retribution, revenge, whatever. But I don't believe that at all. And I don't think there's any evidence, biological, genetic, anthropological, psychological, no evidence to indicate that war comes out of some innate human need. I think people who scoff at nonviolence should be given historical examples. You know, violence is not the only way.
And if necessary, we must be willing to fill up the jails all over the state.
South Africa was transformed, in large part, not entirely, by the application of spiritual principles to the political sphere. Gandhi, obviously, is a fantastic example of that. He believed that love is a force. It's a force that has power. Martin Luther King was another great example of this.
This is an extremely difficult command. Far from being the pious injunction of a utopian dreamer, this command is an absolute necessity for the survival of our civilization. Yes, it is love that will save our world and our civilization. Love even for enemies.
One of the great insights he had was to tell his followers, the racist enemies that are persecuting you are damaged human beings. You have the power to liberate them from their own damaged souls. That you, by following the path of love, are giving them the opportunity to become fully human. Now, that's an incredible bit of judo. They're no longer the all-powerful oppressors. So he brilliantly reframed the way that the other was perceived.
And you couldn't possibly go to war. And if that was the case, you know, if the friend, if the beloved was everyone.
A few years ago, I was with a group interacting with the Dalai Lama personally, and someone said, "What's the most important meditation we can do now?" And without batting an eye, he said, "Critical thinking followed by action." He said, "Discern what your world is. Know the plot, the scenario of this human drama, and then figure out where your talents might fit in to make a better world. And each of us must do something that makes our hearts sing, because nobody will want to do it with us if we're not passionate and inspired."
Every word you utter to another human being has an effect, but you don't know it. If people began to understand that change comes about as a result of millions of tiny acts that seem totally insignificant, well, then they wouldn't hesitate to take those tiny acts.
You know the saying, there's only one way of eating an elephant, a piece at a time. And so, but you can't do anything about global poverty, but yes, you can. You can do something about this guy. Because you see, remember, the sea is really only drops of water that have come together.
You know this if you don't do anything, and if everybody around you does nothing, things will stay.
The power of one. Desmond Tutu.
Now declare that the hearing of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is now in session.
The power of one. Nelson Mandela. The power of one. Mother Teresa. The power of one. That man standing in front of that tyke at Tiananmen Square, defying the Chinese government. The power of one. Everybody has that power of one. Just do something.
You can blow out a candle, but you can't blow out a fire. Once the flames begin to catch, the wind will blow it higher.
But it will take individuals to get really passionate and galvanize others and say, it is possible to change.
Pour moi, le changement s'est produit tout doucement, étape par étape. J'ai commencé par vendre ma résidence de Pasadena, ainsi que la plupart de mes meubles et œuvres d'art. j'ai arrêté de voyager en jet privé et je me déplace désormais à vélo. J'ai accepté un emploi de professeur à l'université du coin pour engager un débat sur ma récente découverte. Et j'ai décidé d'emménager ici, dans un camping résidentiel du quartier nord de Malibu. Le plus marquant, c'est le ressenti que j'ai de cette expérience. Une voix intérieure me dit parfois que je suis fou d'avoir renoncé au luxe qui m'était offert pour adopter un style de vie que la société ne considère pas comme une réussite. Mais pour moi, c'est presque l'inverse.
God says, you know what? I don't have anybody else except you.
Je vous avais annoncé une histoire de maladie mentale, et je sais que vous vous attendiez à quelque chose comme ça. En fait, vous avez eu droit à ça. Ce n'est peut-être pas ce qu'on entend habituellement par la démence, mais comment appeler ça autrement quand on assiste à ça dans la rue? Dans le pays. Sur le continent. Et partout dans le monde. Nous avons commencé ce film en nous demandant ce qui ne tournait pas rond dans le monde, et nous avons découvert beaucoup de positifs. Les notions d'échange et de solidarité, le caractère universel de la compassion et de l'empathie, le mystère et la magie du cœur humain. Lorsque le London Times a demandé à G.K. Chesterton, dans le cadre d'un concours, de répondre à la même question « Qu'est-ce qui ne tourne pas rond dans le monde ?», voici ce qu'il a écrit. « Chers messieurs, moi. » Pour répondre à sa réponse, voici ce que j'écris. « Cher G.K. Bingo. » Selon Howard Zinn, on ne peut pas être neutre dans un train en marche. Il a raison, personne n'est neutre. Chaque jour, nous exprimons notre opinion à travers nos choix et nos actes. Les trains en marche sont encore aujourd'hui ceux de la famine, de la violation des droits de l'homme, de la guerre et de la destruction de la planète. Mais un autre train se met en marche, c'est celui du nouveau monde qui voit le jour. John Francis croit en ce nouveau monde, tout comme Mark Ian Barash, Elisabeth Sattouris, Lynn McTaggart, Daker Keltner, Tom Hartman et même moi. J'ai une bonne nouvelle pour tous les voyageurs de ce train. Même le plus petit des actes compte. Votre façon d'accueillir quelqu'un ou le bonheur que vous ressentez dans la nature, avec votre famille, vos amis, ou même avec des inconnus, tout cela compte. La science est formelle. Chacun d'entre nous, avec les milliers de milliards de merveilleuses cellules étranges qui nous constituent, a le pouvoir de changer le monde. Quand je me suis retrouvé confronté à la mort, j'ai eu envie de vous dire ce que j'avais appris. Nous y voilà, tout est lié. L'univers ne fait qu'un, et tant que nous continuerons à nous diviser, même avec nos ennemis, notre monde restera exactement le même. Il existe une solution pour s'en sortir, et son nom est encore plus court que la lettre de G.K. Chesterton. Ce n'est pas une utopie, c'est la réalité. C'est scientifique, nous l'avons dans nos gènes. Alors voici une dernière question. Qu'est-ce qui tourne rond dans le monde? Espérons qu'un jour nous pourrons tous répondre la même chose à cette question.
John Lennon was not a fool, you know, in that sense when he said, love is all you need. God, love is all you need? Is that all you need? Yeah. That's all you need to start. You know, so let's start.